Welcome to Co-Pilot Podcasts. MJF walked into a sold-out stadium in Queens, New York with his hair on the line. One loss and the scissors come out. He walked out as a three-time AEW World Champion. Today, we're breaking down AEW's first half of 2026, specifically what went down at Revolution, Dynasty, and Double or Nothing, how the title picture has been an absolute roller coaster, and what the numbers say about where AEW stands right now as a business. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clear picture of the biggest moments, the best matches, and the storylines that are going to carry AEW into the second half of the year. My co-host has been tracking all of this closely, so let's get into it. Walk me through how 2026 has shaped up so far.
So the first thing to understand is just how packed AEW's calendar has been. According to the PPV schedule, they've already run Maximum Carnage in January in Phoenix, Grand Slam Australia in February in Sydney, Revolution in March in Los Angeles, Dynasty in April in Vancouver, and then Double or Nothing in May in Queens, New York. That's 5 major events in 5 months, and the quality has been remarkably consistent.
5 events in 5 months. That's a lot of ground to cover.
It really is. And the one that set the tone for the whole year was Revolution on March 15th at Crypto.com Arena in Los Angeles. According to Wikipedia, it drew an attendance of 12,590 and featured 13 matches total, 3 on the 0-hour pre-show, and 8 titles on the line across the main card. Almost every belt in the company was defended that night.
8 titles in one night. That's wild. So what were the headline results?
The main event was MJF defending the AEW World Championship against Hangman Adam Page in a last-chance Texas death match. And according to Suplex Digest review, this was not a weapons-based spot fest. It was described as a hate-fueled, psychologically rich brawl. The match told its story through escalation. MJF started by trying to wrestle a technical match, as if to prove he didn't need the stipulation, and Page forced the issue.
That's actually a really smart way to structure a death match. Most of them just go straight to chaos.
Exactly, and that's what made it stand out. Suplex Digest gave it a 4.75 out of 5. The finish was outstanding. After a buckshot lariat through a table, Page draped an arm over MJF for what everyone thought was the 3 count. MJF kicked out at 2.9, the arena erupted, and then MJF hit the Panama Sunrise into a pile of chairs to retain. The post-match visual of MJF standing bloody and triumphant was described as the image of the night.
A 2.9 kickout in a Texas death match. That's the kind of moment that makes people lose their minds.
And it wasn't just the main event. According to Wikipedia's Revolution recap, the Continental Championship match between Jon Moxley and Konosuke Takeshita, a no-time limit match, also received particularly high marks. Moxley retained by technical submission, and the opening tag team championship match between FTR and the Young Bucks received widespread acclaim from critics for their performances.
So, Revolution was basically a stacked card top to bottom, pretty much.
Thekla also retained the Women's World Championship over Chris Statlander in a 2 out of 3 falls match. And the event featured the returns of Adam Copeland, Christian Cage, Will Ospreay, and Kenny Omega, plus an appearance by Ronda Rousey. According to Suplex Digest, the return of Will Ospreay was described as the moment of the night.
Wait, Ospreay, Omega, Copeland, Cage, and Rousey all in one night? That's a lot of star power.
Yeah, and it speaks to where AEW is right now in terms of roster depth. Revolution was also notable because it was the first AEW PPV to live stream on My AEW internationally, according to Wikipedia. So they were expanding their distribution at the same time they were putting on one of their best shows.
That's a smart move. Grow the audience while the product is hot.
Exactly. And then the weeks after Revolution were just as eventful on TV. According to AEW's official results page, on March 18th, Ospreay attacked Moxley. On March 25th, Kenny Omega beat Swerve Strickland and challenged MJF for the world title. And by April 1st, MJF and Omega had signed a contract for Dynasty. The storytelling on weekly TV was building toward the next big show.
So Dynasty was the next major PPV. What happened there?
Dynasty was on April 12th in Vancouver at Rogers Arena. According to AEW's official results, MJF defeated Kenny Omega, Darby Allin became the #1 contender, Moxley retained the Continental Championship over Will Ospreay, and a wrestler named Knight won the TNT title. And then, this is where it gets really interesting, just 3 days later on the post-Dynasty Dynamite on April 15th, Darby Allin won the AEW World title from MJF.
So MJF wins at Dynasty and then loses the title on TV 3 days later?
On the spring breakthrough edition of Dynamite, yes. And according to AEW's results page, Sting also returned that night, so it was a massive TV episode. Darby Allin then went on a run as champion, defending the title on consecutive episodes of Dynamite against Brody King, against Ciampa, against Knight, before heading into Double or Nothing.
That's a really hectic title reign. Defending on back-to-back TV episodes is not something you see often.
Yahoo Sports actually described Allen's reign as, quote, the definition of all gas, no brakes. He was defending the belt constantly, which built a lot of momentum heading into Double or Nothing, where MJF was waiting with a title versus hair stipulation. If MJF lost, he'd have to shave his head.
Okay, so now we get to Double or Nothing, and this is the one that everyone seems to be talking about.
For good reason. Double or Nothing 2026 took place on May 24th at Louis Armstrong Stadium in Queens, New York, the first time the event had ever been held in the New York City metro area. According to Wikipedia, the attendance was 14,394, and it was a legitimate sellout.
14,000 plus in Queens. That's a big number.
And according to Wrestling Inc., before the show even started, it had already generated enough money at the gate to make it the second biggest North American gate in AEW history, only behind AEW All in Texas 2025, and fourth all-time behind the two AEW All in London events in 2023 and 2024.
Wait, second biggest North American gate ever before the show even started? That's insane!
And then the show delivered. In the main event, MJF defeated Darby Allin in the title versus hair match to win the AEW World Championship for the third time, according to Wikipedia. That makes MJF a three-time AEW World Champion, joining Jon Moxley as the only men to hold the title 3 times.
So MJF keeps his hair and gets the title. Long Island's finest.
And the card around it was stacked. According to Wikipedia, in the opening match, Cage and Cope, that's Christian Cage and Adam Copeland, defeated FTR to win the AEW World Tag Team Championship in what was framed as an I Quit match with a New York street fight stipulation. If Cage and Cope had lost, they would have disbanded as a team forever.
So the stakes were retirement for one of the teams. That's a brutal stipulation.
Yahoo Sports' review called it a fun car crash opener and gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And there's a really fun meta layer to it. According to that same review, Cash Wheeler and Stokely Hathaway recreated the Edge Mick Foley spot from years ago, which was described as a chef's kiss because the match featured the man formerly known as Edge, and Mick Foley himself had kicked off the evening in the pre-show.
Wait, Mick Foley was there? I didn't know he was even signed.
According to Wikipedia, Foley had been signed just days before the event, and Double or Nothing was his on-screen AEW pay-per-view debut, so they signed him and immediately put him on one of their biggest shows of the year. And the callback to his famous spot with Edge in a match featuring the man formerly known as Edge was a really clever piece of storytelling.
That's the kind of thing that rewards longtime fans. Okay, what else happened on the card?
Konosuke Takeshita defeated Kazuchika Okada to win the AEW International Championship. Yahoo Sports gave that match 4.75 out of 5 stars and noted it had been building for the better part of a year. The finish saw Takeshita hit Okada with a raging fire after a sequence that included a Rainmaker countered into a Blue Thunder bomb. And then Kyle Fletcher turned heel after the match, setting up a clear path for Takeshita versus Fletcher down the road.
A 4.75 out of 5 for a match that wasn't even the main event. That's a loaded card.
And then there was the Stadium Stampede, which according to Bleacher Report featured Chris Jericho, the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, Jack Perry, Bobby Lashley and Shelton Benjamin on one side against Ricochet, Bishop Khan, Toa Liana, Mark Davis, Andrade El Idolo, David Finlay and Clark Connors. That's 14 people in a Stadium Stampede. The Jericho side won.
14 people in a Stadium Stampede. That's basically a small army.
And the Women's World Championship was also defended. Thekla retained in a 4-way match against Jamie Hayter, Chris Statlander and Hikaru Shida. According to the Sportster's review, the match rated 7.5 out of 10, with good exchanges between Hayter and Statlander and impressive heel work from Thekla, who won with a curb stomp.
So Thekla is still champion heading into the second half of the year.
Yeah, and the Owen Hart tournament was also running through the show. According to Bleacher Report, the men's bracket featured Will Ospreay versus Samoa Joe and Bandido versus Swerve Strickland in the quarterfinals, while the women's bracket had Athena versus Mina Shirakawa. Athena won her match, though Yahoo Sports noted it felt a bit rushed and gave it 3 out of 5 stars.
So the Owen Hart tournament is still ongoing. That's a storyline thread that's going to carry into the summer.
Exactly. And then the week after Double or Nothing, according to AEW's official results, the post-show Dynamite and Collision had MJF celebrating the title win, Statlander winning a lights-out Philly street fight, and Takeshita retaining the international title on Collision. The momentum just kept rolling.
Let's talk about the business side of this, because the numbers you mentioned earlier are pretty striking.
So Dave Meltzer on Wrestling Observer Radio, as reported by Wrestling Inc., called Double or Nothing a, quote, huge success. He said it was the biggest AEW event ever on HBO Max. And he noted that Revolution had already done a real big number, the biggest since All In, and Double or Nothing beat Revolution by a fairly significant margin. Early numbers he'd seen suggested around 15% up from Revolution.
15% up from what was already their biggest show since All In. That's a real trajectory.
Meltzer said, and I'm quoting from Wrestling Inc.'s transcription here, that it will be, quote, among your top 5 or 6 pay-per-views in the history of AEW. He wasn't sure if it beat All in Texas yet because it was too early to tell, but the gate numbers alone, second biggest North American gate ever, tell you something significant is happening.
And it's interesting because Double or Nothing has historically been a Las Vegas show, right? Moving it to New York was a risk. That's a great point. According to Wikipedia, Double or Nothing has carried a gambling theme since its inception in 2019 because it was held in the Las Vegas area or a venue associated with casinos. This was the first time it broke from that tradition entirely. And not only did it work, Wrestling Inc. noted that given how well the show went down with fans in the New York area, expect more AEW pay-per-views to be hitting the Big Apple in the near future. So they took a gamble, pun intended, on New York, and it paid off.
Pretty much. And when you zoom out and look at the full picture, what you see is a company that started the year with a strong Revolution, built through Dynasty, and then peaked commercially and critically at Double or Nothing. That's a really healthy arc for a first half of the year.
And there's still a lot of year left. According to the PPV schedule, they've got Summer Blockbuster in June in Cincinnati, Forbidden Door with NJPW on June 28th in San Jose, and then All in London at Wembley Stadium on August 30th.
Wembley Stadium, that's the big one. AEW has done Wembley twice before, 2023 and 2024, and both of those are among the biggest gates in AEW history. So the second half of the year has a massive anchor event waiting at the end of August.
And heading into all of that, MJF is the AEW World Champion for the 3rd time. What does that mean for the title picture?
Well, according to AEW's official results, after Double or Nothing, Knight attacked Darby Allin. So there's already a new challenger being positioned. And the Owen Hart tournament is still running, which means whoever wins that is going to be a major player heading into the summer. The title picture is genuinely wide open right now.
And Takeshita is now the international champion after beating Okada, with Kyle Fletcher turning heel. That's a whole other title feud brewing.
Yahoo Sports specifically called out Takeshita versus Fletcher as a match they want to see at Redemption or All In, and said, quote, give me that match in multiple servings. So that's a feud that has a lot of anticipation behind it already.
And Moxley is still the Continental Champion. He retained at Revolution over Takeshita and at Dynasty over Ospreay. That's a long reign.
Moxley has been remarkably consistent as Continental Champion throughout this whole stretch. And the Continental Championship match at Revolution, the no time limit match against Takeshita, was one of the most praised matches on that card, according to Wikipedia. So even in a supporting role on the card, Moxley is delivering.
Let me ask you something. If you had to pick the single biggest moment of AEW's first half of 2026, what would it be?
Honestly, it's hard to separate the MJF Texas Deathmatch finish at Revolution from the Double or Nothing main event. But I think the moment that will be talked about the longest is MJF winning the title for the 3rd time in Queens, near his hometown, with his hair on the line in front of over 14,000 people. That's the kind of moment that defines a year.
And the fact that the title changed hands 3 times in roughly 6 weeks. MJF retains at Revolution, loses to Darby on TV after Dynasty, wins it back at Double or Nothing. Does that feel like too much movement, or does it work?
That's a fair question. On one hand, frequent title changes can dilute the prestige of the belt. On the other hand, Suplex Digest's Revolution review actually argued that MJF retaining was the right call because his championship reign needed a dominant run to establish the belt's prestige. And then when Darby won it, Yahoo Sports described his reign as all gas, no brakes, constant defenses, constant action. So each reign had a distinct identity.
So it wasn't just title changes for the sake of it, each reign told a different story.
That's the argument, and the buy rate numbers suggest fans were buying into it. If Double or Nothing is tracking 15% above Revolution according to Meltzer, and Revolution was already the biggest show since All In, then the audience was clearly engaged with the storylines being told.
One thing I want to go back to, the Cage and Cope tag title win. Christian Cage and Adam Copeland holding tag gold together for the first time in 25 years. That's a legacy moment.
Yahoo Sports' review specifically called that out. Seeing Christian and Copeland holding tag gold together for the first time in 25 years was described as a great way to kick off the show, and the stipulation made it feel earned. If they'd lost, they would have had to disband as a team forever. So the stakes were real.
And then the week after on Dynamite, according to AEW's results, Cope and Cage's 5-second pose went off the rails. So they're already having fun with the championship reign.
Which is very on brand for Christian Cage. The man knows how to be a champion and be entertaining at the same time. And the fact that they won in New York, with Mick Foley in the building, with the Edge Foley spot being recreated, it was layered in a way that rewarded fans who've been watching wrestling for decades.
All right, a daughter finds out she's been quietly cut from her job. Not from her boss, not from a meeting, but by calling the travel department. And that boss? Her own father. That's not a soap opera. That's how TNA Wrestling kicked off 2026. And honestly, it set the tone for everything that followed. Today, we're doing a full partial year review of TNA Wrestling in 2026. We're breaking down the AMC era launch, the feuds that have defined the year, and the matches that actually delivered. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clear picture of where TNA stands, who's running the show in the ring, and what storylines are worth paying attention to. Joining me to dig into all of it is someone who's been watching every episode closely. Let's get into it. So, where does 2026 TNA even begin? It begins with a massive structural shift. TNA debuted on AMC on January 15th, 2026. That's a big deal. A new television home, a new audience, and a real statement of intent from the company. And then, just 2 days later on January 17th, they ran Genesis, their first major pay-per-view of the year, at the Curtis Culwell Center in Garland, Texas.
2 days later. That's a tight turnaround. It was very deliberate. They wanted the AMC premiere and the Genesis PPV to feel like one connected moment, like, here's TNA's new era, and here's the first big event of that era.
According to Wikipedia's coverage of the event, Genesis drew approximately 3,946 fans to the Curtis Culwell Center. 10 matches total, including 2 on the pre-show.
And who was champion going into all of this? So Frankie Kazarian was the TNA World Champion heading into 2026. He'd actually defended the title on the January 1st episode of Impact against Bear Bronson and retained. But then on the AMC premiere, January 15th, Mike Santana defeated Kazarian to win the TNA World Championship. So the new era literally started with a new champion.
That's a strong way to open a new chapter. New network, new champion, same night.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the title change. The AMC premiere also saw the Elegance brand, Heather and M by Elegance, defeat the I Inspiration, Cassie Lee and Jessie McKay, to win the TNA Knockouts World Tag Team Championship. So you had 2 title changes on one episode. That's how you make a debut on a new network mean something.
Okay, so let's back up a little because I think people need context on the faction landscape. Because from what I can tell, 2026 TNA is very much a faction-driven product.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. You've got several major factions running simultaneously. There's Order 4, led by Mustafa Ali, which includes the Great Hands, John Schuyler and Jason Hotch, along with Tasha Steelz and Special Agent Zero. Then you've got the System, which is Brian Myers, Cedric Alexander, Bear Bronson and Eddie Edwards. The Diamond Collective is Tessa Blanchard's group. And on the Knockout side, the Elegance brand is a whole faction unto itself.
That's a lot of moving parts. How does TNA keep all of that from becoming noise?
Honestly, it's a fair question. The best factions have clear, distinct identities. The System feels like a corporate heel stable. They're dominant, they cheat, they're everywhere. Order 4 is more cult-like, with Ali as this calculating leader who uses his group as a weapon. The Diamond Collective is more of a vanity project for Blanchard. They all serve different narrative functions.
And then there's the Ariana Grace situation, which is kind of its own thing entirely.
Right, and this is the one that really grabbed me from a storytelling standpoint. Ariana Grace, who came in as part of the NXT crossover talent, betrayed her father, Santino Marella, who is TNA's Director of Authority. And the reason she gave, she found out she was no longer needed on TNA programming, not from Santino directly, but by calling the travel department. She had to call travel to find out she was cut.
Wait, she found out from the travel department? That's actually kind of devastating.
It is. And that's what makes it work as a heel turn. It's not just I want power, it's a real, grounded grievance. She felt dismissed and humiliated by her own father in a professional setting. According to TNA's own official results from January 1st, Santino was described as visibly shaken and disheveled backstage, still reeling from the betrayal. That emotional fallout carried into the whole first quarter of the year.
And Grace ended up becoming the Knockouts World Champion, right?
She did. By April 2nd, she was defending the TNA Knockouts World Championship against Gia Brookside on Impact. And then on May 7th, she defended again against Lei Ying Lee. So she went from betraying her father to holding the top women's title in the company. That's a complete arc in just a few months.
Let's talk about Genesis itself, because that PPV had some really notable moments beyond just the title picture.
Genesis was genuinely a well-rounded show. The main event was Mike Santana defeating Frankie Kazarian in a Texas death match to retain the TNA World Championship, with Nick Nemeth serving as the special guest referee. According to Wikipedia's coverage, it was the 14th event under the Genesis chronology, and it also featured crossover talent from WWE's NXT brand, which TNA has a partnership with.
The NXT partnership is interesting. How does that actually show up on the shows?
At Genesis, for example, Lei Ying Lee defended the TNA Knockouts World Championship against NXT's Zarya and retained. So you're getting NXT talent coming in as challengers, which gives TNA matches a different kind of credibility. You're not just fighting within TNA's roster, you're fighting across brands.
And then there was the JDC retirement match, which by all accounts was a genuinely emotional moment.
Yeah, this one hit differently. JDC, Johnny Dango Curtis, had his final match at Genesis against Eddie Edwards. According to Wikipedia, it was the culmination of a 26-year wrestling career. The match was billed as The Last Dance, and according to Indie Pro Wrestling's live coverage, the entire locker room came out to applaud JDC after the match as he soaked in the farewell. That's a rare thing in wrestling, a genuine, dignified send-off.
WrestleRant's review noted that the match went slightly long and the melodrama down the stretch was a bit much, but also said it was a nice send-off. So even the critics gave it credit for what it was trying to do.
Right, and that's the thing about retirement matches. They're not really about the wrestling, they're about the moment, and that moment landed.
Let's shift to one of the feuds that I think has been the most consistently interesting, Elijah versus Mustafa Ali, because that one has had some genuinely creative match stipulations.
Oh, this feud has been wild in the best way. It started building on the January 1st episode. Elijah appeared on the stage with a guitar covering his face, played mind games with Order 4, slipped into the ring from behind, and then called out Ali for a match at Genesis. According to Slam Wrestling's recap, the whole sequence was this theatrical, almost cinematic moment.
A guitar covering his face. That's a very specific visual.
It's very TNA, honestly. And then at Genesis, Ali won their match. He used a guitar shot to turn the tide, according to Indie Pro Wrestling's coverage. Ali also suffered a near-toe injury during the match that was shared on social media, though it wasn't expected to sideline him long. But the feud didn't end there.
Because they kept going.
They kept going. On February 19th, they had a guitar case casket match on Impact in Nashville at the Pinnacle. That's a stipulation you don't see every day. And the feud was still alive enough that by April 30th, Elijah was in a Walk with Elijah strap match against Frankie Kazarian, showing that Elijah's character had evolved into its own ongoing thread beyond just the Ali rivalry.
The Feast or Fired match on January 22nd is something I want to touch on because that's such a uniquely TNA concept.
Feast or Fired is one of those things that only TNA does. It's a multi-person match where participants grab briefcases, some contain title shots, and one contains a pink slip, meaning you're fired. The January 22nd version was a 12-man match, and according to the SmackDown Hotel's results, the winners were Eric Young with briefcase 1, Steve Macklin with briefcase 2, Trey McGill with briefcase 4, and Eddie Edwards also with briefcase 4.
Wait, 2 people got briefcase 4?
That's what the results show. And the chaos of not knowing what's in each briefcase, whether it's a title shot or a firing, is exactly what makes Feast or Fired compelling. It's a storyline engine. Those briefcases create months of potential drama.
Let's talk about the system, because they've been everywhere in 2026. Brian Myers, Cedric Alexander, Bear Bronson, Eddie Edwards, they're basically the dominant heel faction of the year.
The system has been booked as this unstoppable force. On February 12th, they defeated Mike Santana, Moose, and the Hardys, Matt and Jeff Hardy, in an 8-man tag team match. That's a massive babyface team, and the system still won. Then, on April 16th, they beat Moose and Leon Slater in a 4-on-2 handicap match. They've been positioned as the faction that just keeps winning through numbers.
And Eddie Edwards specifically has been a big part of the world title picture.
Exactly. The whole arc built toward TNA Rebellion on April 11th at the Wallstein Center in Cleveland, Ohio, where Mike Santana defended the TNA World Championship against Eddie Edwards. According to Last Word on Pro Wrestling's review by Steph Francoeur, Rebellion was described as the second Big Four TNA PL of the year, and it marked a new start after the TNA and AMC TV deal. The card had 10 matches announced and was built carefully off TNA Sacrifice.
And EC3 returned at Rebellion, which was apparently a surprise.
Last Word on Pro Wrestling specifically called it a last-minute surprise. EC3 showing up is the kind of thing that gets a crowd buzzing, and by May 7th, he was in a no DQ match against Eric Young on Impact. So his return wasn't just a cameo, it turned into an actual program.
Let's talk about the Hardys, because Matt and Jeff Hardy being in TNA in 2026 is its own interesting story. They've been in a feud with The Righteous, Vincent, and Dutch.
The Hardys versus The Righteous has been a consistent tag team feud throughout the first half of the year. At Genesis, the Hardys defeated The Righteous to retain the TNA World Tag Team Championship. Then, on April 9th, they had a tables match on Impact for the tag titles. And on February 26th, The Righteous were even brought in as allies against the system in an 8-man tag. So the Righteous have been used in multiple ways, as opponents for the Hardys and as situational allies against a common enemy.
That's smart booking, actually. Using a faction in multiple contexts keeps them from feeling one-dimensional.
Right, and the Hardys themselves bring a built-in audience. When Matt and Jeff Hardy show up, people care. Their history in TNA goes back decades, so there's genuine emotional investment there.
What about the X Division? Because that's historically been one of TNA's most distinctive offerings.
Leon Slater has been the X Division champion and has been a central figure in that division. On March 5th, he defended against Nick Nemeth. On May 14th, he was defending against Cedric Alexander. And the X Division has been woven into the larger faction war. Slater was teaming with Mike Santana against the System on March 26th. So the X Division champion isn't siloed off in his own bubble, he's part of the bigger story.
That integration is something TNA has historically struggled with, making the X Division feel relevant to the main event picture. It sounds like they're doing a better job of that in 2026.
Based on the results, yeah. Slater being in main event tag matches while also defending the X Division title suggests they're treating him as a legitimate star, not just a division placeholder.
Let's circle back to the Knockouts division, because there's a lot happening there beyond just Ariana Grace. The Elegance brand has been a major force.
The Elegance brand, Heather and M by Elegance, won the Knockouts World Tag Team Championship on the AMC premiere on January 15th. And they'd been building toward that for a while. On January 1st, they defeated Lei Ying Lee and Zia Brookside, with Danny Luna interfering to attack Lee. According to TNA's official results, the Angel Warriors had gone 6-0 in 2-on-2 matches in 2025, so that loss was a significant upset.
6-0, and then they lose because of outside interference. That's a clean way to protect the babyfaces while still advancing the heels.
Exactly. And Danny Luna's interference set up her own program with Lei Ying Lee, because she was clearly positioning herself as a Knockouts Championship contender. The Knockouts division in 2026 has multiple threads running simultaneously, the tag titles, the world title, and individual rivalries all coexisting.
What about Tessa Blanchard and the Diamond Collective? Because WrestleRant's Genesis review noted that Blanchard had racked up a ton of losses in recent months and lost a lot of momentum.
That's a real tension in the booking. Blanchard is a big name, she's a former TNA World Champion, but the Diamond Collective as a faction hasn't been winning consistently. By April 2nd, Tessa was in a bunkhouse match against Jody Threat on Impact, which suggests the feud with Threat became a significant program for her. Whether that rebuilds her momentum is the question.
It's interesting because the Diamond Collective feels like it should be a dominant heel faction, but if the leader keeps losing, it undercuts the whole thing.
That's a legitimate criticism. Faction credibility lives and dies with the leader's win-loss record. If Blanchard keeps losing, the Diamond Collective becomes decoration rather than a real threat. That's a booking challenge TNA needs to address in the second half of the year.
Let's talk about the AJ Francis and Rich Swann feud, because that one started at Genesis and kept going.
Francis vs. Swann was actually one of the highlights of Genesis, according to WrestleRant's review. The reviewer, Graham Matthews, said it exceeded his expectations and called it among the best matches he'd seen Francis have. Francis won via pinfall with a massive chokeslam, according to Indie Pro Wrestling's coverage. And then, on January 29th, they had a no-holds-barred rematch on Impact, and Swann won that one.
So they split the series. That's good for both guys.
Right. And WrestleRant specifically noted that Francis winning at Genesis kept the feud alive. It wasn't a definitive ending, it was a chapter. The no-holds-barred match on January 29th was the escalation. That's how you build a feud properly. Each match raises the stakes.
There's also a new name that's been popping up in the results, KC Navarro. Who is that in the context of 2026 TNA?
KC Navarro started showing up in April. On April 16th, he had a match against AJ Francis on Impact. On May 7th, he was teaming with Nick Nemeth against The System. So he's being positioned as a babyface who's getting integrated into the main faction war. It's a sign that TNA is trying to develop new names alongside the established stars.
And Chaz Starboy Hall showed up on May 21st against Mustafa Ali. So there's definitely new blood being introduced.
That's one of the things TNA has to do to stay healthy. You can't just run the same names forever. Introducing Chaz Hall against someone like Mustafa Ali is smart because Ali is an established heel who can make a newcomer look credible even in a loss.
Let's zoom out for a second. If you had to identify the single biggest narrative thread of TNA's first half of 2026, what would it be?
Mike Santana as TNA World Champion and The System trying to take that title. That's the spine of the whole year. Santana won the title on the AMC premiere, defended it at Genesis in a Texas death match, defended it at Sacrifice against Steve Macklin on March 27th, then had the Big Rebellion match against Eddie Edwards on April 11th, and then defended against Rich Swann on April 23rd. The world title picture has been consistently active.
And Santana as champion feels like a deliberate choice for the AMC era. He's a fresh face at the top.
Exactly. Kazarian had been champion, and he's a veteran presence. Santana winning on the night TNA debuted on AMC sends a message. This is a new era with new stars at the top. It's a clean break narratively.
What's been the most creative match stipulation of the year so far, in your view?
The guitar case casket match between Elijah and Mustafa Ali on February 19th in Nashville has to be up there. It's a stipulation that only makes sense within the context of their specific feud. The guitar has been a weapon and a symbol throughout their rivalry. When a stipulation grows organically from the story, it lands differently than a random gimmick match.
The Walk with Elijah strap match on April 30th is also a great example of that. The name alone tells you something about Elijah's character.
Right, and that's good character work. The stipulation reflects the character's identity. Elijah has this almost cult leader energy, and a match called Walk with Elijah leans into that completely.
Okay, so here's a question I want to push on a little. Is TNA doing enough to differentiate itself from AEW and WWE in 2026? Because the faction warfare, the title changes, the PPV structure, some of that could describe any wrestling company.
That's a fair challenge. What TNA does differently is the scale and the intimacy. The crowds are smaller, Genesis drew under 4,000, but that creates a different atmosphere. The fans are close to the action, the wrestlers can hear them, and the storytelling can be more personal. The Ariana Grace and Santino Marella angle, for example, is a very human story that doesn't need a stadium to land.
And the NXT partnership gives them a talent pipeline that neither AEW nor the independent scene can replicate in quite the same way.
That's a real competitive advantage. Having NXT talent come in as challengers, like Zarya challenging Lei Ying Lee at Genesis, gives TNA matches a different kind of weight. It's not just TNA versus TNA, it's TNA versus the broader wrestling world. Let's talk about what hasn't worked, because no half-year review is complete without some honest criticism.
The Ryan Nemeth and Mara Sade situation is worth mentioning. At Genesis, Nemeth defeated Sade in an intergender match, and WrestleRant's review called it a mess that never clicked. The reviewer noted that Sade has been on the rise in the Knockouts division and has made noticeable improvements, so putting her in a match that didn't work wasn't great for her momentum. The reviewer did say Sade needs to get her comeuppance by beating Nemeth eventually, and actually, on February 12th, Mara Sade did defeat Ryan Nemeth in an Albuquerque street fight, so that payoff did come.
Oh, so they did course correct on that. They did. Which is actually a good sign. They recognized the Genesis match didn't land and gave Sade the win in a more appropriate context. A street fight is a better showcase for her than a standard intergender match.
And the Tessa Blanchard momentum issue we talked about, that's an ongoing concern.
It is. Blanchard is too big a name to be losing consistently without a clear narrative reason. If there's a redemption arc being built, it needs to become visible soon. Otherwise, it just looks like mismanagement of a major talent.
So, when you step back from everything we've covered, the AMC launch, the title picture, the feuds, the PPVs, what does TNA's first half of 2026 actually tell us about where the company is headed?
It tells us TNA is in a genuinely interesting transitional moment. The AMC deal is the biggest platform shift they've had in years. They've got a clear world title story with Santana at the top. They've got faction warfare that creates multiple storylines running simultaneously. And they've got the NXT partnership giving them a talent infusion that keeps things fresh. The bones are good.
The bones are good. I like that. But there are still things to fix.
There always are. The Diamond Collective needs clearer direction. The Knockouts division has a lot of moving parts that need to be streamlined. And as TNA moves into the second half of the year with more live events and live Impact episodes, which Last Word on Pro Wrestling noted are now all scheduled, the pacing of storylines will be tested in a new way.
Live television changes everything. You can't edit your way out of a bad segment when it's happening in real time.
Exactly. And that's actually the most exciting thing about TNA's second half of 2026. The AMC era is no longer a promise, it's a reality. Now we get to see...
Voice, arena echo. Welcome to the show where the crunch meets the canvas, where the takes hit higher than a lariat. This is Combos and Gay for Me. Combos and Gay for Me. We'll break it down clean.
casts. The highest attendance in Wrestle Kingdom history, 46,913 people packed into the Tokyo Dome, happened in the same year the roster was being stripped for parts. Today, we're doing a partial year-end review of New Japan Pro Wrestling 2026, the tournaments that are reshaping the card, the storyline arcs that are actually working, and what the next generation of NJPW looks like when the dust settles. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how NJPW is navigating one of the most turbulent roster transitions in its recent history, and why the tournaments, not the championships, are telling the most interesting stories right now. I've got someone who's been tracking all of this closely, so let's get into it. What is the actual state of New Japan right now?
The state of New Japan right now is genuinely fascinating, and I think the word I'd use is transitional, but not in a bad way. The company has been losing talent to WWE and AEW for years because, as PW Torch columnist Sean Radican put it, NJPW simply does not have the financial means to compete with those companies to retain talent. And 2026 has been no different.
Right, and the names leaving are not small names.
Not at all. Gabe Kidd, Clark Connors, David Finlay, Evil, and Hiromu Takahashi, all exiting or having exited the company. Hiromu's final NJPW match actually happened at New Beginning in Osaka on February 11th. And it wasn't even a singles match, it was a tag team match. He and Taiji Ishimori teamed up as Unbound Co. and defeated United Empire's Francesco Akira and Jakob Austin Young.
That's kind of a quiet exit for someone of Hiromu's stature, isn't it?
It really is. And I think that's actually worth sitting with for a second. One of the most electrifying junior heavyweights in NJPW history, someone whose tournament runs were described as chaotic, unpredictable, and filled with breathtaking spots. And his last match is a 9-minute tag on a February show. That tells you something about the pace of change happening inside that company right now.
So before we get into the tournaments and the new faces, give me the foundation. What is NJPW for anyone who's maybe heard the name but never really dived in?
So, New Japan Pro Wrestling was founded by Antonio Inoki in 1972, following his break from the Japanese Wrestling Association. The company's core philosophy is something called strong style, a phrase Inoki coined himself. The Voices of Wrestling 2026 NJPW Primer describes it as a, quote, hodgepodge verbal puree of fervent striking, obstinate fighting spirit, and a paradoxical appreciation of both simplicity of form and dramatically charismatic bursts of roaring, which is honestly one of the best descriptions of a wrestling style I've ever read.
That's a great line.
It really is. And the company has changed ownership twice since Inoki's era, but it still pays tribute to that foundation. The modern match structure actually blends strong style with something closer to the King's Road style of All Japan Pro Wrestling. So it's this layered thing, part sport, part theater, part endurance test.
And the year started with a record. Wrestle Kingdom 20 on January 4th, 46,913 people at the Tokyo Dome. That's the highest attendance for a Wrestle Kingdom ever, according to 411 Manania's review. How do you square that with a roster that's simultaneously losing people?
That is the central contradiction of NJPW in 2026. The brand is bigger than the roster, at least for now. Wrestle Kingdom is NJPW's equivalent of WrestleMania. It's the Tokyo Dome. It's January. It's the biggest night of the year. People show up for the occasion as much as for the card. But you can't sustain that forever if the in-ring product doesn't keep pace.
And Wrestle Kingdom 20 was also Hiroshi Tanahashi's farewell, right? The ace.
Yeah, Tanahashi's send-off. He's been the face of NJPW for a long time, the ace, as fans call him. So you have this record attendance, this emotional farewell, and simultaneously the company is figuring out who the next generation of main eventers actually is. That's a lot of weight on one night.
So who is the company building around right now?
The clearest answer is Yota Tsuji. He captured both the IWGP Heavyweight Championship and the IWGP Global Heavyweight Championship at Wrestle Kingdom. And according to Sean Radican at PW Torch, Tsuji is improving rapidly as a main event act, though there are still some missing pieces. What's interesting is how his psychology has evolved. In his title defense against Jake Lee at New Beginning in Osaka, he specifically targeted Lee's legs to neutralize Lee's dangerous knee strikes and kicks. That's smart, layered wrestling.
That's actually a really specific detail. He's not just winning, he's winning with a plan.
Exactly. And that's what separates a transitional champion from a real top guy. Tsuji retained the IWGP Heavyweight Championship at New Beginning in Osaka on February 11th, which Wikipedia confirms had an attendance of 5,507 at the Osaka Prefectural Gymnasium. So you go from 46,913 at the Dome to 5,507 in Osaka. That's the reality of the touring schedule.
That's a pretty significant drop.
It is, but that's also just how NJPW works. The Dome is the peak. Everything else is the grind. And the New Beginning show was actually pretty loaded. Beyond the Tsuji Lee main event, you had the Knockout Brothers retaining the IWGP Tag Team Championship over Shota Umino and Yuya Uemura, Ren Narita winning the Never Openweight Championship over Aaron Wolf in just over 2 minutes, and Callum Newman defeating David Finlay.
2 minutes for a title change? That's fast.
2 minutes and 9 seconds, to be exact. And that's a whole conversation about the House of Torture faction, which Ren Narita is part of. They've been a source of real frustration for a lot of fans and critics. The interference, the shortcuts, it's a style of heel work that wears on you.
Okay, so let's get into the New Japan Cup, because that feels like the real turning point of the year so far. Walk me through what happened.
The New Japan Cup ran from March 14th through March 21st across Yamanashi, Fukushima, and Nagaoka. It's a single elimination tournament, and the winner earns an IWGP Heavyweight Championship match. This year, that match was set for Sakura Genesis. And the story of this tournament is really the story of what happens when you clear the deck of the established acts and let the young talent run.
Because the early rounds were apparently rough.
The early rounds were rough. Neil David's review on Voices of Wrestling was pretty blunt about it. The opening rounds were dire, and the House of Torture fatigue was a real problem. But then something shifted. Boltin Oleg eliminated Ren Narita in the quarterfinals, and according to David, that elimination gave the final matches a, quote, gust of fresh air.
So getting rid of the House of Torture representative literally changed the atmosphere of the tournament.
That's exactly what the reviews suggest. And the Oleg-Narita quarterfinal match itself was interesting. Narita worked Oleg's leg really well, described as being like a viscous snake biting over and over again. But then the interference came, Don Fail showed up, and it became the same old pattern. Oleg still won, though, and the match was described as a great showcase for him specifically.
And Boltin Oleg has been on an upward trajectory this year?
Significantly. The Voices of Wrestling review noted that he's improved significantly in recent weeks and risen in the reviewers' estimations more than any other wrestler. His charisma has found its place, described as subtle yet convincing. He sold the leg injury throughout the match that made the tournament feel like it was actually wearing him down. That's storytelling.
What about the other quarterfinal that people were talking about, Yuya Uemura versus Shingo Takagi?
That match is the one that really got people excited. Shingo Takagi is a veteran, an established name, and he came in with total confidence, showboating, laughing with the fans, messing with the camera. He was going to send this kid packing. And then Uemura grabbed his arm and wrestled him to the ground. The review says it took half a second, but Shingo's face told a story. The shock in his eyes was so palpable that you understood Uemura had leveled up.
That's such a good image. The veteran's face when he realizes the kid is actually for real.
It's a classic wrestling moment, and it works because Shingo's credibility makes Uemura's win mean something. You can't manufacture that. The semifinals then came down to 4 young talents: Bolton Oleg, Shota Umino, Yuya Uemura, and Callum Newman. And the Ranton review on YouTube specifically called out the Umino-Newman semifinal as stellar.
And Newman won the whole thing.
Callum Newman defeated Yuya Uemura in the final on March 21st at the Aore Nagaoka in Niigata, and he had the entire United Empire behind him going into Sakura Genesis to challenge Yota Tsuji for the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. The Ranton review called him the Prince, which is a great nickname for someone who's essentially being positioned as the next big thing.
And that United Empire connection is interesting, right? Because Will Ospreay built that faction and then left for WWE. So now Newman is kind of inheriting that infrastructure.
That's a really sharp observation. The United Empire went from being Ospreay's vehicle to potentially being Newman's launchpad. It reframes the faction from something that lost its biggest star into something that's actively manufacturing the next one. Whether that works long-term depends entirely on Newman's ceiling, but the structural setup is there.
And PW Torch's Sean Radican had a pretty strong take on what the Cup meant for NJPW's direction overall.
He did. His headline was essentially that NJPW gets back to basics, building new talent with strong storytelling and in-ring action. And his argument was that NJPW Booker Guido had his ducks lined up in a row. The departures were anticipated, and the company had been quietly developing young talent for years while the roster was being raided. The Cup was the moment that development became visible.
That's a more optimistic read than a lot of people might expect, given how many names left.
It is, and I think there's a counter-argument worth making. Radican himself acknowledged that NJPW still has some missing pieces around Tsuji, and that Shota Umino, who was one of the 4 semifinalists, has struggled with NJPW trying to force-feed him to fans as the next big babyface. They've tried shaving his head, putting him in all-white gear, and nothing has really clicked. So, the youth movement is real, but it's uneven.
That's fair. Not every young talent is going to land at the same time.
Right, and that's actually what makes the tournament format so valuable for NJPW. It gives you a controlled environment to test who connects and who doesn't. The New Japan Cup this year essentially ran a 4-person audition for the next wave of main eventers, and the audience got to vote with their reactions in real time.
Let's talk about the G1 Climax, because that's the big one on the horizon. And this year's edition is doing something genuinely different.
The G1 Climax 36, the 36th annual edition, is opening in the United States. Night 1 is July 11th at the No Arena in Hoffman Estates, Illinois, just outside Chicago. According to Grokipedia, this is only the second time the event has ventured outside Japan, and it's being framed as a significant push for greater international reach.
Chicago. That's a real statement.
It really is. And then the tournament travels back to Japan, Sapporo, Sendai, Niigata, Tokyo, Osaka, Hiroshima, Fukuoka, before finishing with the finals weekend on August 15th and 16th at Ryogoku Sumo Hall in Tokyo. The full schedule was announced on April 6th, according to TPWW. That's a massive logistical undertaking.
Going from Illinois to Sapporo and then across Japan over 5 weeks, that's not a small thing.
Not at all. And the format itself is worth explaining for anyone who's new to it. The G1 Climax uses a round-robin block format, 2 blocks of 10 wrestlers each. Everyone faces everyone else in their block, 2 points for a win, 0 for a loss. Block winners meet in the final. According to Wrestling Moments, the 2026 field is expected to include approximately 90 block stage matches across the tournament's duration. That is a lot of wrestling.
90 matches, and every single one matters for the standings.
That's what makes the format so compelling. A single loss can derail a favorite, and a surprise upset can catapult an underdog into contention. Wrestling Moments describe the standings board as must-refresh viewing throughout the tournament. It's almost like following a sports league table in real time.
And the prize is massive. The winner gets an IWGP Heavyweight Championship shot at Wrestle Kingdom.
Wrestle Kingdom is NJPW's January 4th Tokyo Dome show, the biggest night of the year. So winning the G1 in August means you spend the entire second half of the year building toward that moment. It's a long game. And the G1 trophy shelf, as Wrestling Moments put it, reads like a who's who of modern wrestling greatness. Kazuchika Okada, Kenny Omega, Hiroshi Tanahashi, Kota Ibushi, Jay White, Will Ospreay, Jon Moxley, Sanada.
And there's an AEW connection this year too, right?
According to Grokipedia, AEW President Tony Khan has indicated that AEW talent is expected to participate in the G1 Climax 36, building on the ongoing partnership between the two promotions. That's a significant detail because it means the tournament field could include names that casual wrestling fans in the US would recognize, which ties directly into why opening in Chicago makes sense.
So the G1 opening in America with potential AEW crossover talent, that's a real international expansion play.
It's the clearest signal yet that NJPW is not content to just be a Japanese product that hardcore fans import. They want a broader audience. And the timing makes sense. If you're building Yota Tsuji as your top guy and Callum Newman as the next challenger, you need more eyeballs on those matches.
Meanwhile, while all of this is being set up, the Best of the Super Juniors 33 is happening right now. What's the deal with that tournament?
Best of the Super Juniors is NJPW's junior heavyweight tournament, the junior division being the lighter, faster, more acrobatic weight class. It runs in May and into early June, and according to the official NJPW website, the 33rd edition is currently underway, with block updates being posted through late May and into June 2026. The final leads into Dominion, which is another major NJPW event.
And the winner gets a shot at the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Championship.
Exactly. Wrestling Moments describes the prestige of winning Best of Super Juniors as second only to holding the title itself. It's the defining accolade in the junior heavyweight division worldwide. And the 2026 edition is described as one of the most open tournaments in BOSJ history, with new challengers from NJPW Strong and returning veterans from Japan's domestic scene.
The junior division feels like it's at a crossroads too, especially with Hiromu gone.
That's the exact word Wrestling Moments used, crossroads. Hiromu Takahashi was described as the most electrifying junior heavyweight in NJPW, someone whose matches operate at a different speed and intensity than virtually anyone else on the roster. Losing him creates a vacuum. El Desperado's technical mastery and Bushi's heel tactics keep the LIJ junior contingent relevant, but there's no one right now who fills that Hiromu-shaped hole.
And that's kind of the theme of 2026 across the board, isn't it? Holes being left by departures, and the question of who fills them.
That's exactly it. And I think the honest answer is that NJPW doesn't have one person who fills any of those holes individually. What they have is a group, Tsuji, Newman, Uemura, Oleg, who collectively might be able to cover the ground that was lost. It's a different model than the Okada era or the Tanahashi era, where you had one undeniable ace.
Is that a sustainable model, though? Can a group of emerging talents carry a promotion the way one transcendent star can?
That's the real question. And I think the New Japan Cup gave a cautiously optimistic answer. When the tournament's final four were all young talent, and the matches were described as being about competition, sport, storytelling, and fighting spirit, that's the language of a promotion that's found something. Whether it holds through the G1 and into Wrestle Kingdom 21 is a different story.
And the Sakura Genesis show on April 4th at Ryogoku Sumo Hall, that was where Newman got his title shot against Tsuji. How did that fit into the arc?
Sakura Genesis was the payoff for the New Japan Cup story. Newman earned that shot by winning the tournament, and the entire United Empire was behind him. It's the kind of match that either validates the tournament result or undermines it. The fact that the NJPW official website lists Sakura Genesis on April 4th at Ryogoku Sumo Hall confirms it happened, though the specific result isn't detailed in the search results I have.
Fair enough. Let's zoom out a bit. If you're someone who's been watching NJPW for years and you're feeling a little uncertain about the direction, what's the argument for optimism?
The argument for optimism is that the company has been here before. NJPW has changed ownership twice, survived the post-Inoki era, and rebuilt multiple times. The 2026 NJPW primer from Voices of Wrestling notes that the company of today bears only partial resemblance to the company of Inoki, having changed ownership twice, but still pays immense tribute to their founder. Reinvention is in the DNA.
And the argument for concern?
The argument for concern is that the financial gap between NJPW and WWE or AEW is not closing. Every time NJPW develops a talent to a certain level, that talent becomes attractive to a company that can pay more. Hiromu, Ospreay, Kid, Connors, Finlay, the pattern is consistent. And at some point, you have to ask whether the developmental pipeline can keep up with the outflow.
It's almost like NJPW is functioning as a finishing school for the global wrestling industry.
That's a really apt way to put it. And the G1 Climax opening in Chicago with potential AEW crossover talent is interesting in that context. It's NJPW trying to use those partnerships to grow its own audience rather than just feeding talent to other promotions. Whether that strategy works is one of the most interesting storylines of the second half of 2026.
So when you step back from everything we've covered, Wrestle Kingdom 20's record attendance, the new beginning in Osaka, the New Japan Cup, the G1 Climax announcement, Best of the Super Juniors, what's the actual narrative of NJPW's 2026 so far?
The narrative is a company in the middle of a controlled burn. They lost a lot of established names, but they anticipated it. Guido had the young talent ready. Yota Tsuji is the present, Callum Newman is the immediate future, and the G1 Climax is the mechanism that will tell us who the next chapter belongs to. The tournaments are doing the storytelling work that the championships alone can't do right now.
And the record Wrestle Kingdom attendance, does that give the company runway to make this transition work?
It gives them credibility and momentum. 46,913 people at the Tokyo Dome is not a company in crisis, it's a company that still commands the biggest stage in Japanese wrestling. But credibility and momentum don't pay roster salaries. The international push, the AEW partnership, the G1 in Chicago, those are the moves that could change the financial equation.
Here's what this really comes down to. NJPW in 2026 is running two stories simultaneously. One is the in-ring story, young talent stepping up, tournaments creating genuine drama, Yota Tsuji growing into a main event role with real psychological depth. The other is the business story. Can a promotion that keeps losing its best talent to richer competitors build something durable enough to stop the cycle?
And those two stories are connected. The better the in-ring product gets, the more Callum Newman looks like a star, the more Bolton Oleg's charisma lands, the more Yuya Uemura pulls off moments like that Shingo Takagi upset, the harder it becomes for other companies to poach those guys without a fight. The product is the retention strategy.
That's a really interesting frame. Build the culture strong enough that leaving feels like a loss, not just a payday.
Exactly. And the New Japan Cup this year was the clearest evidence that the culture is still there. When you strip away the interference and the faction politics and just let four young wrestlers compete with fighting spirit, the crowd responds. That's not nothing. That's actually everything.
And the G1 Climax 36, opening in Chicago on July 11th, is the next real test. If NJPW can draw a meaningful American crowd for a round-robin tournament that most casual fans have never heard of, that's a genuine proof of concept for the international expansion.
And if AEW talent participates, it gives that Chicago crowd familiar names to anchor the experience. It's a smart on-ramp for new viewers. The round-robin format, where every match matters, where a single loss reshapes the standings, is actually more compelling than a bracket once you understand it. The challenge is getting people to that understanding.
So for anyone listening who's been curious about NJPW but hasn't known where to start, what's the entry point right now?
Honestly, the New Japan Cup finals from March are a great starting point. The Voices of Wrestling review literally says, if you haven't watched any of the New Japan Cup, start with the quarterfinals and watch through to the end. You won't regret it. And then the G1 Climax in July is the next big event. Opening night in Chicago is...
Predictions on lock, counts around in the scene. It's Combos, the undisputed machine. Step into the circle where the numbers don't lie. We track every pop, every swerve, every high. From the locker room whispers to the main event flame. We decode the whole business like it's part of the game. Got Melvin with the matrix, Council with the heat, red splits in the wild when the minds don't meet. We got low, we got laughs, we got six.
Welcome to Co-Pilot Podcasts. A champion walks into the biggest match of the year as a six-woman target. Every analyst in the wrestling world picks against her, and she walks out still holding the gold. That is exactly what happened on May 15th when Athena retained the ROH Women's World Championship in the first ever Women's Survival of the Fittest match at Supercard of Honor 2026. Today, we are breaking down Ring of Honor's first half of 2026, the storyline arcs that have been building since January, the key match results that shaped the landscape, and what the Supercard of Honor told us about where this promotion is actually heading. By the end of this episode, you will understand the major feuds, who came out on top, and what threads are still dangling heading into the second half of the year. Joining me to dig into all of it is someone who has been tracking every episode of ROH on Honor Club this year. So, let's get into it. What is the single most important thing people...
The most important thing is the context of how ROH actually exists in 2026. This is a streaming-only product. Every single episode airs on Honor Club, which is ROH's own streaming service. There is no traditional TV deal, and that is a deliberate choice by Tony Khan.
Right, and that is actually a pretty bold stance, isn't it? Because according to Wrestling News, Tony Khan reportedly turned down a Warner Bros. Discovery offer for a Friday night at 10 p.m. slot back in 2024.
He did. And the reasoning, according to that same report from Fightful Select, is that Khan is waiting for what he called a perfect situation, a media partner that offers a rights fee that matches what he thinks the brand is worth. In the meantime, Honor Club is the home, and he has described it as a profitable model.
So ROH is essentially betting on itself, which is either visionary or a little risky, depending on how you look at it.
Exactly. And it shapes everything about how the product is built. The storylines develop week to week on Honor Club TV, and they also cross over onto AEW Dynamite and Collision. So if you are only watching AEW, you are getting pieces of the ROH story, but not the full picture.
Okay, so let's set the stage for the year. ROH kicked off 2026 on January 1st with episode 148. Walk me through what the landscape looked like at the start of the year.
So right out of the gate on January 1st, you had Bandito and Jay Lethal versus The Swirl. That's Blake Christian and Lee Johnson. And that match ended in a no contest, which is actually a really telling way to start the year because it immediately signals that the Bandito and Blake Christian tension is not resolved. It is just beginning.
And that thread runs all the way to Supercard of Honor in May.
All the way. That is one of the cleaner long-term arcs of the first half. Blake Christian is described by Ringside News as a crafty, opportunistic heel who can steal a win with underhanded tactics. And Bandito is the high-flying, innovative champion. So you have this classic dynamic, the flashy babyface champion versus the scheming heel challenger.
And on the women's side, what was the big arc building from January?
The Athena and Billie Starkz story. And this one is genuinely fascinating because it is a mentor-protege relationship that has been slowly curdling. According to Ringside News, Athena actually stole a pinfall from Starkz during a 6-woman tag match and then aggressively reminded her protege to stay in line. That is not a mentor, that is a controller.
Oh, that is such a good detail. Because on the surface, it looks like Athena is protecting her student, but really, she is just protecting her title.
Exactly. And Starkz has been winning matches consistently throughout the year. You can see it in the results. She and Diamante were teaming up and picking up wins as early as episode 148 on January 1st, defeating Deonna Purrazzo and Madison Rayne. So Starkz is clearly being positioned as someone ready for a bigger moment.
Which makes the Survival of the Fittest setup even more loaded, because you have Starkz in the same match as Athena, and the whole world is watching to see if she finally gets that moment.
And here is where it gets interesting. Tony Khan announced the first ever Women's Survival of the Fittest tournament for Supercard of Honor at the April 6th taping of ROH Honor Club TV. So this was a relatively late announcement, but it immediately became the marquee match of the night.
Let's talk about the 6-man tag picture too, because Dalton Castle and the Outrunners had a whole arc running through the year as well.
Yeah, and this one is fun because it is a bit more straightforward, but no less satisfying. From the very first episode of the year, Dalton Castle and the Outrunners, that's Truth Magnum and Turbo Floyd, were picking up wins. On January 1st, they beat MXM TV in a fight without honor. On January 8th, they beat the Frat House. On January 22nd, they beat another team. They were just rolling.
And Shane Taylor Promotions was the obstacle standing between them and the 6-man tag titles.
Right. Shane Taylor, Carly Bravo, and Captain Sean Dean were the champions heading into Supercard of Honor. And that match had been building through the whole first half of the year, with Shane Taylor Promotions picking up wins of their own, Lee Moriarty and Trish Adora beating Darius Martin and Zeta Steele on January 8th, for example. So both sides were
Okay, so now let's get to Supercard of Honor itself. May 15th, Wicomico Youth and Civic Center in Salisbury, Maryland. The 19th edition of the event. What was the overall vibe going in?
The vibe going in was genuinely optimistic. Ringside News wrote that ROH has been doing really well lately with great matches and interesting storylines, and that Tony Khan wanted to carry that momentum into Supercard of Honor. The card on paper was stacked, multiple title matches, the historic women's survival of the fittest, pure rules bouts. It looked like a strong night.
And the attendance was 1,367, according to Wikipedia, which, for a streaming-only event in Salisbury, Maryland, is a real crowd showing up.
Yeah, and it is worth noting this is the second consecutive year that Supercard of Honor did not take place during WrestleMania weekend. That is a shift from the tradition the event had since 2006. So the promotion is clearly comfortable charting its own calendar.
All right, let's go match by match on the big ones. Start with the ROH World Championship, Bandido versus Blake Christian.
So this was the culmination of that arc that started on January 1st. Blake Christian finally got his long-awaited one-on-one opportunity against Bandido. And the result? Bandido retained. He defeated Blake Christian to keep the ROH World Championship.
Wait, so Christian did not win? Because WrestleVoice had predicted Christian to take the title.
Correct. WrestleVoice predicted Blake Christian would win, calling it his time once and for all, but Bandido retained. And that is actually a significant storytelling choice. It keeps Bandido as a fighting champion and leaves Christian's arc unresolved, which means there is still more story to tell in the second half of the year.
Interesting. So the show did not go the way most analysts predicted.
Not entirely, no. And that brings us to the women's survival of the fittest, which was the main event. Athena defending against Maya World, Trish Adora, Yuka Sakazaki, Billy Starks, and Zeta Steele. WrestleVoice predicted Zeta Steele would win. Most people expected Starks to finally get her moment. Athena retained.
So Athena just survived the whole field.
She did. And this is the thing about Athena. She has been described as the long-reigning forever champion. That is literally her character. She does not lose. And the survival of the fittest format, where you have to survive multiple opponents, is almost tailor-made for a dominant champion to prove exactly that.
But here is what I keep thinking about. What does this do to the Billy Starks story? Because Starks went into that match with all this momentum, all this tension with Athena, and she still did not get the title.
It makes the story even more combustible. Starks has now been in Athena's orbit, winning matches, building credibility, and still not getting the moment. That tension is not resolved, it is amplified. And that is actually good storytelling, even if it is frustrating in the moment.
Yeah, and it is worth noting that Persephone was originally supposed to be in that match, but was pulled due to injury, according to WrestleVoice. So the field was already adjusted before the show even happened.
Right. Zeta Steele had to earn her spot in a qualifier at Supercard Showdown against Hyan. So there was real stakes attached to even getting into the match. That kind of layering is what makes the women's division feel alive right now.
Let's talk about the six-man tag result, because that one actually went the way people expected.
It did. Dalton Castle and the Outrunners, Truth Magnum, and Turbo Floyd defeated Shane Taylor Promotions to win the ROH World Six-Man Tag Team Championship. And given how consistently Castle and the Outrunners had been built up throughout the first half of the year, this felt like a payoff that was earned.
And the show also featured the return of the Kingdom, Matt Taven and Mike Bennett. According to Wikipedia, that was a notable moment at Supercard of Honor.
Yeah, the Kingdom returning is one of those moments that means a lot to longtime ROH fans. Taven and Bennett have deep history with the promotion. Their return signals that ROH is leaning into its own legacy, which is something the brand has always had as a differentiator.
Now, I have to bring up the critical reception because it is genuinely interesting. Voices of Wrestling called Supercard of Honor 2026, and I am quoting directly here, easily the weakest Ring of Honor PPV of the Tony Khan era.
Yeah, that is a pretty sharp take from Sean Sidor over at Voices of Wrestling. And it is worth sitting with because on paper, the card looked strong. Multiple title matches, a historic first, pure rules bouts. But execution and paper are two different things.
So what do you think was the disconnect?
It is hard to say definitively without seeing every match, but one thing the Voices of Wrestling review does highlight is that some of the zero-hour matches felt like they were doing a lot of setup work rather than delivering. The Sammy Guevara versus Action Andretti match was rated 3.25 stars, solid, but not spectacular. And Rush's squash match over LSG was not even rated, just noted as a building block for something else.
And that Rush thread is interesting on its own. The Voices of Wrestling reviewer was openly wondering what all these Rush squash matches are building toward. Maybe an AEW World title shot?
Right. And that is actually a good example of how ROH functions as a feeder system for bigger AEW stories. Rush is doing work on ROH programming that could pay off on the main AEW stage. It is a deliberate ecosystem.
Which brings us back to that broader question about ROH's identity. Is it its own thing, or is it AEW's developmental territory?
And that tension is real. According to Wrestling News, there have been internal discussions about rebranding the promotion as AEW Ring of Honor to leverage the parent company's visibility. Khan has not done it yet, but the fact that it is being discussed tells you something about how the brand is being thought about internally.
That would be a massive shift. ROH has its own identity, its own history going back to 2002. Slapping AEW on the front of it changes the whole brand proposition.
It does. And Khan has also been using ROH as a platform for both established stars and fresh developmental talent. The Wrestling News Report mentions recent signings like the Rascalz, Tommaso Ciampa, and the return of Andrade El Idolo as examples of that roster depth strategy.
Okay, let's zoom back into the pure rules picture because that is something ROH does that nobody else really does at this level. You had Lee Moriarty defending the ROH Pure Championship against Ace Austin at Supercard of Honor, and Deonna Purrazzo defending the Women's Pure Championship against Diamante.
The Pure Rules division is genuinely one of ROH's most distinctive offerings. The rule set, rope breaks are limited, closed fists are illegal, forces a different kind of match. And Deonna Purrazzo has been described by WrestleVoice as one of the best technical wrestlers in the world who has elevated the women's pure title. That is a real endorsement.
And you also had Nigel McGuinness versus Josh Woods in a standalone Pure Rules match. Nigel is a legend in that format.
Absolutely. WrestleVoice described it as a classic Pure Rules clash between two technically sound wrestlers who respect the rule set. Nigel brings veteran savvy and ring psychology. That kind of match is exactly what the Pure division is supposed to showcase.
And on the TV title side, AR Fox had captured the ROH World Television Championship by defeating Nick Wayne, and then he defended it against Lio Rush at Supercard of Honor. Lio Rush with this Blackheart persona.
Yeah, Ringside News described Lio Rush's Blackheart persona as making him a more dangerous opponent. And AR Fox winning the TV title in the first place was described as shocking. He defeated Nick Wayne to capture it. So Fox was already an underdog overcomes the odds territory heading into the Lio Rush match.
And on the women's TV title side, Red Velvet was defending against Viva Van. WrestleVoice had predicted Van to win that one.
Right. Viva Van had been building momentum through qualifying and proving ground matches. Red Velvet was described as a solid champion with athleticism and experience. That match was framed as a fresh face ready for a breakout moment versus an established champion.
So when you step back from everything we have covered, the Athena arc, the Bandido title reign, the six-man tag payoff, the Pure division, the streaming-only model, what does the first half of 2026 actually tell us about where ROH is as a promotion?
It tells us ROH is a promotion that is genuinely committed to long-term storytelling. The Bandido and Blake Christian arc started on January 1st and ran all the way to May 15th. The Athena and Starks tension has been building for months. These are not quick feuds. They are slow burns.
And the slow burn approach works on a streaming platform in a way it might not on traditional TV, right? Because the audience is self-selecting. They are coming to Honor Club specifically for ROH.
Exactly. You are not fighting for casual channel surfers. The people watching Honor Club are invested, so you can afford to take your time with a story. The question is whether that audience is growing or staying flat.
And that is the tension at the heart of the whole streaming-only strategy. Khan says it is profitable, but without a traditional TV deal, the ceiling on audience growth is real.
It is. And the critical reception of Supercard of Honor, being called the weakest PPV of the Tony Khan era by Voices of Wrestling, is a signal that even the most invested fans have expectations that need to be met. A stacked card on paper is not enough if the execution does not land.
So what is the most important unresolved thread heading into the second half of 2026?
Without question, it is Athena and Billie Starks. Athena retained at Supercard of Honor when almost nobody thought she would. Starks is still right there, still in the orbit, still without her moment. That story has to pay off eventually. And when it does, it is going to be one of the biggest moments ROH has had in years.
And the Bandido story is not done either. Blake Christian did not get the title. That feud has more chapters.
Right. And you have Rush building towards something. You have the Kingdom returning. You have new signings like the Rascalz and Tommaso Ciampa adding roster depth. The second half of 2026 has a lot of material to work with.
Here is what this really comes down to. ROH in the first half of 2026 was a promotion that planted a lot of seeds. Some of them bloomed at Supercard of Honor. Dalton Castle and the Outrunners finally got their six-man tag titles. Bandido proved he is a legitimate long-term champion. But the biggest story, Athena and Starks, is still unwritten.
And that is actually the most honest summary of where ROH is right now.